Today is October 17th, 2013, and it's also the release of Microsoft's Windows 8.1. I'm going to demonstrate how straightforward it is to install 8.1 to an ESXi 5.5 virtual machine. So let's get started with the VMware vSphere web client. Go ahead and log in. We want to use this because I want the latest and greatest features that VM version 10 offers. And you need the vSphere client to do that. A better description of why that is coming up shortly here. Okay, so the only thing I did to prep for this video was downloaded the ISO file from Microsoft and uploaded it to a data store on this ESXi host we're about to install to. Next, if you click on Host and Clusters, you'll get that familiar view where if we point to the ESXi host summary tab, there we are, we're on ESXi 5.5. Now we just right click and say New Virtual Machine. Click Next. Name. It's important to get a decent name. I use this naming scheme. Big, bold template, and then a description of the operating system. I pretty much assume 64-bit at this point. You may want to put x64 or 32 if you still use 32. And then a build number. What's the build number from? Well, that's from the CD. So we're going to go with the Microsoft Developer Network download that looks like this. Not the volume license or VL on the file name. That one can be problematic in the home lab. So I'd recommend this version of Windows 8.1 Pro. Let's click Next. And Next again. Picking a run core solid state drive that has plenty of gigabytes left. We don't want to run low. I think we're going to use about 16 gig to get this installed. Compatible with 5.5 and later? Yes. So what this means is you won't be able to go back to an older version of 5.5, or older than 5.5, like 5.1. Windows version. Notice I'll show you the whole list. There is no Windows 8.1. Don't worry about it. The Windows 8 64-bit drop-down menu choice works great. Notice it's confirming VM version 10 in the bottom right for us. Click Next. This screen is very important. Pay attention to every detail on here before you continue. And I'll describe why I'm choosing what I'm choosing each step of the way. First thing, hard drive. We could pick a different CPU and memory. That's up to you. I'm going to leave all that alone, but I am going to go right into hard drive section and expand it and describe for you what I'm choosing here. I'm going to go with terabytes instead of gigabytes and 8 terabytes. Why? Right here, this article. VMware Workstation 10 allows you up to an 8 terabyte hard drive size. So if you want to be able to perhaps easily migrate this in and out of VMware Workstation over to ESXi 5.5 and back, typical in a home lab to occasionally need to do that, well, 8 terabytes would be your max. Not the 62 is the maximum. And I've done that. But booting from an 8 terabyte hard drive requires this new version of ESXi 5.5 with VM version 10. So this will work fine. We also will no longer have to resize or worry about resizing a C drive in this virtual machine. So this is a multi-purpose template we're building, and I like to have a nice giant hard drive. We want to make sure we thin provision it. We've chosen the size, 8 terabytes, which is ridiculously huge, and we're on a measly 128 gig solid-state drive, so we have to be careful we don't run out of space in solid-state drive. Okay, we're done with the hard drive section. Collapse that for clarity. Let's move on to network and change it to the optimized faster network driver. Let's move on to CD-ROM now and say data store ISO file, run core, that's the solid-state drive I showed you earlier, ISO folder. Click OK. Make sure to click on Connect to Power On, very important. Okay, what is next? If you have need for 3D card or beefing up the video memory, multiple monitors say, you might want to turn that on. But for simplicity, I'm going to leave that off. Your needs may vary. More important is to go to the VM Options tab and give this virtual machine a chance of actually working because it's 8 gig in size. Remember that? So if we go to boot options, we need to change the BIOS type to EFI. There. Now it'll work. So we now are ready, finally, to click Next. We get a confirmation screen to let us double check all our work, proofread, and click Finish. Okay, so it's created an empty vessel, a virtual machine that hasn't been powered on yet, and nothing's been installed to it yet, right? So let's show you that Launch Console is grayed out. Don't worry about that if you're not used to this interface. Just right-click on the VM, power it up, and now Launch Console will become a clickable option. Now the EFI BIOS has some unique behavior. Again, this should be a one-time kind of effort. This is your template, your master build. They're going to be deploying from, or copying from, or cloning from later. So you shouldn't have to deal with this particular nuisance very often at all. Very easy to work around this. In the upper right corner, you have Send Control Delete. Click Send Control Delete to the VM. Click in that window and hit Spacebar, and now we're booting from the ISO file that's on the solid-state drive. Click on Next. Standard Windows 8 1 install. Notice it says 8. It doesn't actually say 1, which is interesting. Click Install now. Wait a little bit. Accept the license terms. Notice it does say Windows 8 Pro at this point. It's interesting as well. The screen looks different if you use the volume license version. We're going to do a custom install. There is nothing to upgrade. There's nothing on this empty hard drive. Notice it's 8 terabytes in size. Just click Next. And off it goes. It's partitioned it as one giant C drive, and it's laying down Windows 8.1 now. Okay, for computer name, we might want to use something like Windows 8.1 Pro, and then VM 0, and then kind of reminding you to rename it 1, 2, 3 when you deploy from the template. It's just one scheme. Obviously, you may have different ideas. We can go with Express for the purposes of simplicity here. Pick a username for your default user account. It makes you type a hint. We then endure this welcome video. Okay, here's our desktop. By clicking on desktop. What's the first thing you want to do to get this VM acting more fully functioned? So I'm going to hit Tab after hitting Control-Alt, my previous browser window, and now we can click on Install VMware Tools. All right, so I'll tab back to the VM, click on this thing that pops up, and run VMware Tools Installer. Next, typical install. Okay, as that's cruising along, I'm going to explain what I'm going to do with the clock. This is a setting that has to happen after you boot the VM. So we're going to turn off NTP timesync from Windows, and we're going to instead tell VMware to talk to the virtual machine through VMware Tools and synchronize the clocks that way. So my ESXi host has an accurate clock that's NTP synced, but my VMs don't need to go hitting some NTP server to do that. I'd rather they just stay synchronized with the ESXi host that they're running on. In a home lab environment, that's quite appropriate. It just makes sense. I'll say yes to this. So now it becomes a local network rather than public from a firewall rules perspective. So VMware Tools installed and then got a proper driver going for a local network. I'm going to say no. I don't need to do this reboot quite yet. Okay, my mouse is going to be a little wonky though until I do that, so just tolerate that for a minute. Let's fix the clock. So right-click and say adjust date and time. Go to Internet Time, change settings, turn off that time sync, click OK. And back to the main page, change our time zone appropriately. I'm in East Coast. And there we go. And click OK. I then hit Windows plus R and type netpl wiz.exe. And for lab purposes and ease of reboot, I turn off prompt for username and password. I click OK. It asks me to type in the password. This is a good way to protect yourself from getting locked out if you don't boot this VM for months and you've forgotten the password. At least you can get in. So just pointing that out. But you do want to use a password you can remember. Okay. Next, resolution. Right-click on the desk, say resolution, and let's go to something a little beefier. Like 1440 by 900 is a good compromise that fits without having to pan around or scroll around. Keep changes. Yes. Now I'm ready to hit Control Escape in the up to get my or Control Alt to get my mouse out of hostage mode. Send Control Delete, and let's just reboot this sucker. You get a more normal mouse experience instead of that goofy cursor thing you're seeing. So it'll be in good shape with VMware Tools running after. Okay. Little tweak I like to do. Notice my mouse can move in and out now. I don't need to hit anything. Hit the Windows key in the VM. I tend to move this to a consistent place. I usually go with bottom left corner. I can right-click it, resize it, and make it large. So I'll make it super easy and obvious to get to the desktop. What else do I do on my VMs? I make sure all icons show here. I don't want any surprise things running that I can't see. Notice VMware Tools is in a stealthy mode. And do you remember what we did with the clock there? We got to finish up. So Alt-Tab. What we have to finish up here is go into Edit Settings and head on over to the VM Options tab and go to VMware Tools section and say Synchronize Guest Time with Host. Okay. Turn off screensaver. Windows plus W will do nicely, and say power. Edit power plan is handy. Let's not turn off the display ever in this virtual machine. Let's not put the computer to sleep, this virtual machine to sleep ever. And then we want to change advanced settings and turn off this require password when waking up. Okay, again, we're trying to keep this thing running for months and not having to be nagging you with a password all the time in a VM that can be annoying in a lab environment. Next, remote desktop. So Windows plus X key is your power user menu there. Then choose System, then choose Remote Settings, and say Allow remote connections to this computer. And finally, optionally, you may enjoy this tip, making Task Manager auto-start as an effective CPU monitor in your system tray. It takes a few more minutes. You can follow along with that video how to do it. Basically, you have a little tray icon that shows how busy your VM is at all times. But that's it. My clock is synced. I've got VMware tools. I've got a seamless mouse. I have a decent resolution. And because of the size of the resolution I picked, I can actually make it so I don't have to run it full screen all the time. I can do something more like this. Okay, that's a Chrome add-on you're seeing where you see the resolution. You can ignore that. But you see my point. You've got a little room now to have this remote control window, which you can maximize, or you can double-click and bring down to a normal size. And that remote control window should fit very comfortably on your 1024 by 768 typical home lab monitor. Remember, there's cool stuff you can do in here now, like disconnecting and reconnecting USB devices, including USB 3 devices. If you go into Edit Settings one more time, you will notice that I never did turn off the CD. It's hard to remember to do that after creating a virtual machine. There's no reason for that to be connected anymore, that data store ISO file. In fact, to avoid any kind of tie with the underlying ISO file that was there, I tend to go and point to Client Device and then click OK. So now, Run Core is the only device, the C drive is the only thing associated with this VM. No longer is it trying to look at an ISO file. Memory use you'll see only in the beginning. So we can reset that to green. That's normal for it to use up the memory, and that will settle down. VMware tools, not so normal because we have that and we've rebooted. So let's see if we switch away and switch back. All right, we're still getting a VMware tools warning. Might be a bug, might be something about Windows 8.1. I'm really not sure. But that is a very minor thing. The speed is excellent. We can go ahead and personalize it and give yourself a probably a more normal color scheme. And last touch. Show Windows Edition on desktop. You'll notice it doesn't show up. I'll also point out if we hit Windows plus X and System, you can look at licensing and it says activated. So remember we had to type in a license key early. When we go to deploy this, you're going to have to reactivate, I believe. So when I say deploy, I mean clone from this template. But before we shut down this template for that one last time, let's get this thing to show our Windows version on the desktop to reduce confusion as you're remotely controlling, for instance. So Windows plus R, reg edit, hit enter, say yes, and let's open this up to the right section. I am going to H key current user control panel desktop, paint desktop version, type in 1 and close it. Finally, automatic updates. We hit Windows plus X and go to System, we can check out the Windows Update setting. There are no updates available now. Because it might be a while till you boot this thing again, it can be pretty CPU and disk and network intensive when it does this. So we might want to change the setting. You may prefer to have this never checking for updates and not nagging you in a lab. This is really, again, up to you, of course. And if you have antivirus or some third party or Office you're thinking of, good to turn on that checkbox for Microsoft to update as well. Okay, and click OK. Interesting that we told it to never check, but then because we turned on that check for other products for Microsoft, it's going to do this anyway. Let's just not fight it and see what happens. Okay, so we're getting a bunch of warnings, right? But let's go to change settings, never check. So we should be good to just close this and ignore for this master template. Keeping it light and trim and simple. And now we can actually go ahead and shut it down. Or, since it's a little bit of a hassle, I tend to do things a little different with this. Let me show you. I'm going to hit Windows plus R, browse my way to a network share to this utility I have. I'm going to copy that utility to the clipboard, go to my C drive, and create a new folder called util in a folder called command. Batch files in a folder called command. Things like auto start task manager at boot, for instance. In util, I put this power off utility, and then we can just right click it and say pin to taskbar. Okay, so what is this utility? A very easy way to say, typically you want to reboot, force applications to close if they're giving you trouble, and do it immediately to the local machine. We save the settings and close it. So now, without having to reach in the upper right or do anything, we just click our red button and reboot the VM. In this case, we're actually going to, this particular boot, we're going to shut down. Okay, what's next? Well, let's think about it. It's done. We're done creating this template, right? That means we want to deploy from it to actually use it or do stuff with it or kick the tires or install software to it. So this virtual machine is now off. It's still working on turning off. Let's see if we hit refresh here, if anything happens. Okay, it is off. Now we can right-click and say, clone to template? No, not so much. We could convert to template. Okay, that's basically instant. And if you click home here, click on VMs and templates, you'll now see a list of all your stuff, including a very obvious template here, the one we just built. Okay, here's one I did earlier. Notice to delete stuff, it's buried a little more, a little harder to accidentally delete things. Okay, the one we just built is now sitting there very clear. What do we want to do next? Well, again, you can't power it up, but you can deploy a virtual machine from this template. And here's when you want to do a naming scheme like Windows 8.1 Pro VM1 instead of VM0, right? It's destined to become VM1. Click Next. Click on the ESXi host you want it on. Click Next. Same format as source sounds good. The run core still seems to have adequate disk space for sure. Surprised that number's not lower. That's a little weird. So we know it's thin provision, so I don't need to fiddle with that, and it'll be the fastest cloning is when it's same format as source. Click Next. Do we want to customize the operating system? Well, sysprep and all that, that's kind of beyond scope for what many people do in a home lab. We can not worry about that and just leave it alone. We could customize the hardware, but I'm okay with the one CPU, 2 GB memory for now. And we could actually power on the virtual machine right after creation. One less thing to remember to do when it's done. Upper right corner, you have a progress bar. I'm going to speed up time now to show you the job finished. Okay, that was less than 2 minutes, not bad. Now that we've done that, we can go back to a more traditional view. Click Home, Hosts, here's your ESXi host, and all the VMs under it, including the new one. We can close that old remote control session we're no longer using, and we can open a new one. Notice our version is painted on our desktop. We want to hit Windows plus X and System to go ahead and rename this thing before we forget to VM1. Now it's unique. While we're in here, we can see Windows is still activated. So that's pretty cool. We don't have to deal with the licensing at this moment in time. Okay. One customization you might like, or a couple actually, would be properties of the taskbar. You get these new functions on the navigation tab, and you can say, hey, when I reboot or sign in, go to the desktop. And hey, when I hit the Windows key, you bring up my big Metro UI or modern UI icons, show my background, it's less jarring, and then finally show start. There you go. Your desktop shows through and dims a little bit as you bring up these big icons. So there you have it. We're done with the virtual machine. Didn't take us very long to build. If we click on Explore, we should see our ginormous C drive. There it is. Pretty cool, huh? Look at its properties, the pie chart. You can barely even see the operating system on there. And this virtual machine could live for years. You could stuff it full of data and just move it to data stores or storage vMotion to other data stores that have more room than this one by simply right-click, migrate, and move it to a bigger hard drive. If you just run tight on space, like you'll see this one has 3 terabytes left, right? That'd be a good home to move this to if I start filling it with data. So thank you for watching. Hopefully you found this video helpful. And thank you for visiting tinkertry.com.